Hello, everybody. We'll get started here in just a moment once everybody gets their audio connected and has come in from the waiting room. Good to see some familiar faces today. Okay, so as people get logged in, I'll just go through the housekeeping items. As you know, today's webinar is the importance of peer support in Native America. We are featuring Jason Butler. I'm Megan Dotson, and I'm the program manager here for the National American Indian and Alaska Native TTC. I won't go into too much about myself, but I know that I'm in my 20th year with the university, and that will be coming at the end of March. And so I have several years of experience in the field, and I appreciate what I'm doing now so much. So we'll get on to what we're part of here in this network that I work for. We're in the middle of the country in University of Iowa, Iowa City. And then these are all of our partner organizations with a sub 10 regional centers, a network coordinating office, and a Hispanic and Latino MHTTC. So we are funded by SAMHSA. So the content of this event is the creation of the presenter, and the opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of SAMHSA, HHS, or the American Indian and Alaska Native MHTTC. Following today's event, you will get an email that will include links to the recording, our website, any applicable information because you have registered for this webinar. So no need to follow up with us because we'll follow up with you. It usually takes a day or two before they can get the recording transitioned to put on our YouTube channel, but it will have all the information you need in that email for attendance today, along with the handouts. So we do like to take the time each presentation we have to acknowledge the land. And so I'd like to read this for you, if you would give me a second here. We would like to take this time to acknowledge the land and pay respect to the indigenous nations whose homelands were forcibly taken over and inhabited. Past and present, we want to honor the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. This calls us to commit to forever learn how to be better stewards of these lands through action, advocacy, support, and education. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced occupation of Native American territories, and we respect the many diverse indigenous people connected to this land on which we gather from time immemorial. So while these injustices are still being committed against indigenous people on Turtle Island, today we say thank you to those that stand with indigenous peoples and acknowledge that land reparations must be made to allow healing for our indigenous peoples and to Mother Earth herself. This passage was created by 3 of our former members of our team at our center from the Meskwaki Nation. So thank you for listening. And as we move on today, the most important part, we have our speaker, Jason Butler, and he's an enrolled member of the Ute tribe. And so I will let Jason introduce himself while we get our slides transitioned out so we can begin the presentation. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Go ahead, Jason. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon, you guys. It's good to be here. Like Megan mentioned, my name is Jason Butler. I am a member of the Ute tribe from Fort Shane, Utah. But I currently reside in Fort Hall, Idaho, where I work for the Shoshone-Bannock tribes as the behavioral health manager. So I've been doing some work with Megan and some of the other agencies that work through SAMHSA, just through the Leadership Academy, and then just through doing some other things. But like one of my main passions is peer support. So let me get my slides up and we'll kind of get started. I just want to do a quick introduction.
And so as Jason's getting up his slides, again, you will get a copy of this in a PDF format. So don't worry about emailing any of us to send it. We will send it to you since you registered for today. So thank you, Jason.
Okay. Oh, I don't want to do that. It is interesting, like I've done this so many times, and you think you got it all set up right, and
I have that same problem. So it's not just you, especially when you use multiple screens.
yeah,
We can see it though, and it looks great. Thank you.
the slideshow on one side, but I want to make sure I have my notes on the front side, so I'm not looking this way and you guys are looking at me. So a little funky technology today, but it's all good. So we'll go ahead and get started, and you guys see the slides all good, right? So I hope so. So today's presentation, like Megan mentions, the importance of peer support in Native America. And as we said, my name is Jason Butler. I'm a member of the Ute Tribe. I am a certified peer recovery coach from the Idaho Board of Alcohol and Drug Addiction Counselor Certification. I also have my BA in psychology from Idaho State University, and I have a master's degree in family and human development from Arizona State University. And as I mentioned before, I'm currently employed with the Chauvin Tribes here in Fort Hall as the behavioral health manager. More importantly, what I found just through my professional development is that I have lived experience. So, you know, I have educational background, but at the same time, I always tell people like, I have all these, you know, I have these degrees, I have a certification, but I have a doctorate in being a Native American male, you know, just everything that comes with that. And, you know, it's a tough road sometimes to go through, and, you know, to have to, you know, just the experiences that we have. And, you know, I had a pretty rough go through my teenage years and 20s and 30s, and, you know, finally climbed my way out of it, you know, but dealt with a little bit of addiction and, you know, some other issues, and, you know, just trauma that we face. And what I found is that a lot of that is universal within a lot of our communities. So a lot of our people are going through these things, and a lot of times we grow up and there's this factor of, you know, kind of being ashamed of these things, you know. And once I began to, you know, I decided to make positive changes in my lives and in my life. And as things started to work out, I started to feel better and better, and started to accomplish my goals, and, you know, realizing my potential, and finally got to a point where I was able to give back. And what I realized is that the experiences that I had are shared by so many, and the fact that I was able to climb out of that, I realized that's the most important tool that I have, you know, and that I can't spend time being ashamed of those things, or trying to run from them or forget about them, because that's my life, you know, and that's exactly what brought me to this point right here, to be here talking to you guys, you know. So I always think back now and I look at some of those struggles, and if I hadn't gone through those things, I wouldn't be here right now. You know, I may be somewhere else doing something completely different and not have the same views that I have today. So, you know, I think that's the most important part, and that's exactly what brings me here today to talk about this. Because, like I said, I have these degrees, and my master's degree came with a certification in marriage and family counseling, but I declined that because I don't feel like some of these certifications and the ethics that are involved, they don't really jive with myself and who I am as a Native person. You know, so as much as I would like to do that and feel that I would be effective in that capacity in helping people, I also know that that would take away from my ability to be a full member of my community and be able to participate the way I want to, and like make the connections that I want to with people. Because I always feel that, you know, changing and making change is hard enough, but if we're not able to fully connect with people, especially our own people, as we help them through that process, it makes it a lot more difficult for people that are oftentimes already hesitant, you know, to seek help. So, just a brief introduction, I think, of you know, I mentioned some of the accomplishments that I have, but I think that's probably the most important thing, and usually what I spend the most time on, because, you know, that's really where most of my knowledge comes from, and the rest is kind of just picking up things here and there to help, you know, I guess help along with some of the things that I've done. So, And then Megan, how much time do we have? I forgot to ask you that. So
We have 60 minutes, so if you wanna leave time for
Mhm.
questions, I would plan to be done at 12:50.
Okay, okay, cool. Okay, so let's get started. And usually, so this was part of a different presentation. I did like a three-part series, and I did it for a couple of universities, and so those are smaller groups. So we had like introductions and went around the room, but we have a pretty large group, and we're a little bit restricted in time. So I condensed this down. The other presentations are a little bit longer, but we'll start with just the general question of what is a recovery coach, you know? And a recovery coach is anyone interested in promoting recovery by removing barriers and obstacles to recovery and by serving as a personal guide and mentor for people seeking or in recovery. So this definition was taken from CCAR, which is Connecticut Community for Addiction Recovery. And they do a lot of the training that has kind of become the cornerstone of a lot of like the recovery coach training in the United States. So I know a lot of states that are adopting certifications for recovery coaching have used their training model. They kind of started this whole recovery coach movement. So that's their definition, and I think it's a pretty good one. So, you know, some of the roles and responsibilities that come with that, you know, being a motivator and cheerleader, which is super important. You know, when we talk about people in recovery and, you know, think about the ups and downs that it takes when you have individuals that are entering in from active addiction to just wanting to make positive change and then actually taking actions to do that. There's a lot of ups and downs in that process. You know, there's a lot of times where you hit obstacles and you want to give up, or a lot of times we find that people relapse. But there's just, you know, when you think about it, if you guys have worked with people in recovery, it's like a wild roller coaster ride for the first couple of years that people are trying to make that change. So having someone there that's able to constantly be that motivator is really important. And then, you know, kind of like a cheerleader as well, in the sense that, you know, every little accomplishment that we make while we're on that journey needs to be recognized, you know. So it's important to have someone there to be able to recognize those things and encourage people and let them know that they are doing well. Because a lot of times individuals are coming from places where they haven't had that growing up or even into adulthood, where they have people in their lives that actively tell them you're doing a good job, you know, or it's okay that it didn't work out this time. Just get back on and we'll figure it out and we can keep going. So, I mean, sometimes just as words as simple as that can really go a long way. Being an ally and confidant, so, you know, somebody that people can rely on. You know, again, people don't often grow up with that. People that they can confide in and talk to that will just listen, you know, and not judge them. So that's a big part of that, is just having that person there that you can connect with in that manner. Being a truth teller, you know, and that's also a big one. Having someone that is always going to be honest with you. You know, when you think about it, a lot of our communities, a lot of our families, we haven't grown up to be people that have those difficult conversations. You know, so when we encounter issues where there's conflict or things aren't going right or people are not behaving properly, we don't often confront them and let them know. Or if we do, we don't do that in the right way. You know, it often comes out in negative ways when we decide to do that. But a lot of the times what I found is people avoid conflict and kind of just tend to brush those things under the rug a lot of the times. You know, and a lot of times in our families when we have conflicts, we'll just ignore the problem until we eventually forget about it. And then we just go back and pretend like nothing happened and just completely avoid the fact that there's this big thing that took place. So having that person that's able to actually tell you the truth and point things out, you know, point out mistakes and point out things where, you know, if you're saying that, you know, you want to make these positive changes and you're doing behaviors that don't match up with that, someone there to point out those inconsistencies, you know, to let you know, like, hey, you know, you keep saying that you want to make these changes, but at the same time, you keep doing this. You know, those two things don't match. You know, let's talk about that a little bit. you know, so having someone there that's always, you know, able to be honest. And then having a role model and a motivator. So, you know, again, you know, a lot of us didn't grow up with male role models. You know, a lot of the people that I grew up with, a lot of my uncles and people, my father was absent in my childhood. He's since come back and, you know, he's become a great father and grandfather. But when I was growing up, he was not there. And most of my uncles were involved in alcohol and drugs. So I saw a lot of drinking and a lot of alcoholism and, you know, had, you know, a lot of my male role models that died from alcoholism, from cirrhosis, you know. So having individuals there again that have that lived experience that have been through it, because a lot of times the only thing we see is the opposite end of that spectrum, where we see people that don't get out of that pattern of behavior and don't make it out of there. So, you know, having people that are able to come in and say, look, you know, I've been through what you've been through, you know, some of the same experiences that you're having, I've had as well, but I made it through that, you know, and this is how I did it, you know, we can find a way for you to do that. But it's somebody for someone to look up to and somebody that's on the same level. And that's the important part of that is that, you know, it's not a counselor, it's not, you know, anybody that you would look at, like hold to some higher standard. You would in the sense of a role model, but at the same time a recovery coach is coming in at the same level. So, you know, there's really no hierarchy there. um, a problem solver, you know, someone that's able again to identify what's happening through the recovery process and then able to kind of look at that and help individuals solve those problems. So, you know, one of the big parts of that is that, you know, CCAR's motto is, you know, you're in recovery when you say you are, and that it's the individual's recovery. So we're never to like intervene in that. It's always about them. We can help them to solve their problems and kind of point things out, but at the same time, we're there to help them to find that for themselves. Being a resource broker, so like constantly helping people to find the resources that they need. And that's a part that I think is oftentimes missed when we talk about like clinical treatment and some of the other services that we provide that pertain to substance use disorder. Because a lot of times we say, well, people are coming in, they have suffering from, you know, issues with alcohol or drugs, and that is the problem. So we need to target that, and they need counseling. They need to go to support meetings, and they need to do these certain things, and that's going to fix the issue. But what we find oftentimes is that there is a host of other issues that are at play. So there may be housing issues. They may not have vehicles. They might not have babysitters if they have kids. They may not have a job, and therefore not money. Maybe a housing issue. They may not have food. You know, all of these basic needs come into play when we talk about the success of somebody and their recovery. You know, but a lot of times we have blinders on and we think, okay, we go from addiction to treatment, right? And we forget about all those other things. So like they can go through a successful treatment program, but then once they get released, they have no place to go. They have no place to live. They don't have a job. They don't have money. They don't have food. They don't have a ride. If they have kids, they don't have a babysitter to go run around and do all of those things. So being that individual that is aware of all of the different resources that are available in the area and able to connect people to those is just super important. And then advocacy. So, you know, that's one of the big ones, because as you go through that process of hooking people up with resources, what you often find is that because there's stigma and labels attached to individuals that have engaged in behavior related to alcohol and drugs, and even magnified for Native communities because our communities are so small and everybody knows these individuals. So a lot of times they'll come in for services, and as soon as they walk in the door, before they even say anything, individuals are looking at them and saying, oh, I know them. You know, if we help them, all they're going to do is just go out and do this. Or, you know, we helped them before and this is what happened. And, you know, it's always like that. So, you know, they kind of discredit the idea that people have the ability to change. You know, and what you find oftentimes is that because individuals have grown up a certain way, they oftentimes don't feel empowered. They don't have a voice. Again, going back to those difficult conversations and being able to speak up for yourself and do those things, a lot of times we find that people go in for services, and because they've been labeled as soon as they walk in the door, even though they qualify for something, people are like, no, you know, we don't have that, or you don't qualify for that, but they do. You know, because they're not empowered enough to ask questions, or even if they know they don't have that ability to say, well, you know what, I do qualify. They'll just walk right out the door with their head down, you know? And there goes all of the work they put in to decide, you know what, I finally am feeling good enough to go in for ask for help, which is a hard thing to do in itself. And then to get told no and just walk right out the door and say, well, I knew it. You know, I knew this was going to happen. And that's why I never go and ask for help, or that's why I don't trust anybody, because as soon as I ask, this is what happens. So having an individual there with you, and we had this happen several times when I was working with peer support, was that we would have people come into the office just down in the dumps and be like, what's going on? You know, and well, I remember you told me to go over and check these guys out because they could offer me this. Well, I walked in there and they told me that I couldn't get it and I didn't qualify and this and that. And you're like, well, hold on a minute, you know, let me give them a call. So we'd call them and say, hey, you know, we sent this individual over there and I know that they qualify for this service. Why are they being denied? You know, and then, oh, you know, oh, this is Jason. Yeah, this is Jason. And I'm the one that sent them over there and I've been working with them and I'm wondering what's going on, you know. So then it's a whole different story, you know. But when you have that individual there and you can ask those questions in front of them, you hang up the phone, you're like, okay, let's go back over there and see what's going on now, you know. But now you've shown them, you've given that role model, you've shown them, and you've advocated for them, and they see now, okay, I get it. You know, the next time this happens, I can ask all these same questions that he asked, and then I get what I want, you know, or what I deserve. And that's happened so many times. I've seen that happen. And it's amazing to watch, because the more you do that, the more you advocate for people, you start to watch it as they go through their recovery in the process, and it steps up. And eventually, you know, they may not even want to walk into that office by themselves. So it's like, well, let me call them and I'll talk to them for you. The next time it's like, well, you saw me talk to them, why don't you give them a call? The next time they may give them a call. Next time they're willing to go in and get the service themselves. And it just progresses to where eventually, if they get told no, they're walking in there on themselves, by themselves, they're being told no, and then they're asking questions, and then they're getting the service, and they're walking out of there with their head held high because they finally found a voice to speak up for themselves, and they got what they deserve. Where maybe a year later, they would have just walked out the door, put their head down, and probably just given up, you know? So, that advocacy and role model and the resources, that's all super important. Also, you know, being a community organizer, so, you know, having the ability to, you know, put together, whether it's support groups or life skills classes, community events, that's a big one, but just bringing the community together in general. So again, a lot of times what we find is that we have, say, events or, you know, whatever it may be, and people, every time people are like, oh, yeah, that's alcohol and drugs, I don't need that, you know, I don't use, or I don't do this, or, you know, I quit 10 years ago, I don't need to go to that. But you don't realize that, especially in Native communities, we're so close-knit that whatever anybody is doing is affecting you. You know, we all have a hand in how we solve these problems, but also in like our responsibility to that problem as well. You know, so by participating in certain community events, you're showing people, again, being that role model as a community member, to come together and say, you know what, I'm not going to judge you anymore, and I am going to include you. And when you guys do things, I am going to come over and support you. You know, so like being that community organizer where you're ultimately trying to create, I guess what you would call is like maybe a recovery community. You know, so I know a lot of times we would have like open barbecues and stuff in the summer. and it would just be like Recovery Appreciation Day. But we wouldn't keep that exclusively to our clients. We would open it up to the whole community so that we could just get everybody there and say, we're celebrating recovery, and celebrating wellness, as a community, not just as just only individuals that are trying to help themselves. We want everybody to be a part of that. So that's a big part of that. So, it gets back to, again, why is it so important for our own people, though, for Native people? There's a lot of reasons for that. So, this was from another presentation that I had. Like I said, this was like a 3 or 4 part thing that we did. And one was integrating cultural ideology into behavioral health practices. And I'm just going to go through a few of these just to give us a little bit of a background. But, like the importance of culture is huge. Because right now we have a loss of culture in our communities. That creates a huge identity issue, which oftentimes is manifesting itself in a lot of the issues that we're seeing within our communities. The reasons for that, assimilation into Western society, when we talk about, the world that we live in today is completely foreign to our people. We've adapted to that eventually, but it's a very slow process. And when you think about it, our people were living the way that they always had for centuries only 100 years ago. It wasn't very long ago, so I know my great grandfather told me stories of, when our people were going back and forth from Colorado to our reservation in Utah still, like going back and forth from our homelands to our reservation, because we had just been placed there. Our tribe was one of the last ones in the early 1900s, late 1800s, to be placed on a reservation. So like he had memories of his parents and his grandparents living the old way, and they still had that when he was growing up. So it wasn't all that long ago, and trying to adapt and like come into a modern society where every single thing is different is very difficult, and that creates historical trauma from, a lot of different standpoints throughout history, from that first contact all the way through until some of the things that we have now. But these issues, they create distrust and a hesitance to seek services. So again, what we find sometimes is, we have all of these issues and we have a lot of angry people because they know full well why those issues, how they were created, and who created them. So a lot of times we have services and we have, like, say for instance, again, going back to degrees and certifications, we're taking these Western methods and of treatment and evidence-based practices for counseling and different clinical treatment and different things like that. And we're saying, okay, we're going to use these methods to treat the problem that it created, So you have like this society that created these issues, and then we're going to use their methods to create the problems that arose from that. And it just doesn't work all the time. And, although these things have been proven to work, and we have a lot of people, especially our older people, that have zero trust for it, they're not trying to walk into any counseling office or doctor's office or really any type of modern treatment for any type of healthcare. So there's a huge hesitance and distrust there. Integrating culture into behavioral health practices can help with some of these issues. So, all those, there's barriers that exist, but at the same time, I think when we can incorporate who we are and make it a little bit more inviting and realize that, again, in order to fix some of these problems, we have to go back to who we are and to our own identity. And through doing that, that will alleviate a lot of the trust issues that we have, some of the barriers that can arise through this, again, I mentioned at the beginning, the ethical guidelines that we have to follow. So trying to, I think, maneuver through that can sometimes be difficult because certain professions are only allowed to do certain things. So again, that's where peer support can come in big because they're allowed to do a lot more things. Time restraints. So that's a huge one. I know, for our program here, the counselors that we have, they're going full time. So it's really hard to ask them to do anything outside of, what their actual practice is within their job duties. And that's true of our mental health counselors and our substance use counselors. So, I mean, asking them to do extra things or things that are kind of a lot of times you find also that like integrating culture in certain ways is outside their scope of work. So even if we wanted them to do that, it's just not possible due to the fact that their scope of work doesn't allow for it. Culture can be a sensitive subject. So, that's a huge one that I've found in kind of beginning the process of integrating cultural practices into what we do. A lot of tribes within tribes, a lot of times you have different clans or different bands or different communities, you have different families, and a lot of times they do things in different ways. So, and then you have other places that are quite unique, like the tribe that I work for now, which is my wife's tribe, but it's the Shoshone-Bannock tribes. That's two tribes that were put here on the same reservation. So they have both their own languages, they have their own beliefs, some of their own practices. So like trying to work within a community and implement some things is sometimes a sensitive subject because you have to make sure that you're inclusive to everybody. And you also make sure that a lot of times you're not getting so specific in doing things that you're offending anybody, because like I said, there's different ways to do certain things depending on, what family you come from or what clan you come from, different things like that. So, can often be a sensitive subject. One of the ways that I've found around that is to always partner and include our language and cultural preservation department. So anytime I want to do something, that's the first place I go and I say, this is what I'm thinking about doing, and I think that culture would play a big role in what we're doing here, but I want to know what you guys think and how we can incorporate some of the things that you're doing or some of the cultural teachings into what we're doing, and then allowing them to come up with some of the ideas of how we do that, and then kind of collaborating on the best way to move forward with it. So like always being inclusive in that way when it ever comes back to it, because you're not always going to make everybody happy, but at the end of the day, if you can always say, well, I collaborated with the language and culture department, at least you have that to say, it wasn't just something that I decided to do and then went out on my own and, decided to do this. There was consultation in that process. And integrating culture does not eliminate the hesitance to seek service. So just because you're going to implement some of these things, it doesn't mean that automatically is going to, allow for everyone to, I guess, want to come in and do that on their own. But it is a means to kind of alleviate some of the trust issues. So now we get into kind of the importance of peer support. And this goes right along with those barriers. So, again, these are individuals who are members of the community. So that's the most important part. A lot of times when we're hiring for clinicians and people with degrees and certifications, there is a huge shortage right now, just nationwide, with finding people that have these certifications. But it's even harder to find Native people that have them, and then even harder to find like tribal members from the community that have these things. And that goes both ways. So with that one, a lot of times there could be benefits to having non-tribal members as clinicians, because when you have individuals coming in to share some of those things and getting clinical help, sometimes they don't want community members to know all of those things. They have to be comfortable with people. So a lot of times our own people will point to like, well, we need tribal members in these positions and this and that. A lot of times what you find is that people coming in to seek service, they don't want to be seen by tribal members. They want to be seen by outside people because of that, just again, the close-knit community. But when it comes to peer support, these are members of the community. So you have that there, and they're not providing clinical treatment. They're doing all of the things that we talked about before with the roles and responsibilities. And they can also act as kind of recruitment, because a lot of times what you find is that these individuals that are coming from the community, they are ex-addicts and they are ex-alcoholics, so they know everybody. When I was working for our treatment program and building the peer recovery support program, Like there was not a time that someone came in seeking services that one of our coaches or myself didn't know or hadn't partied with at some point in our lives, or used with. So that goes a long way when you have somebody that's hesitant to come in for services, but they see a familiar face that they know and that they trust, So like when you get at that level with people that you've grown up with or you've come to know very well and do some of those negative behaviors with, there is a trust thing there that you have that they know that you're the real deal. So when they come in and they see you, a lot of times that's a means to be able to grab a hold of them and be like, hey, look, I remember what we used to do, but this is where I'm at now. And like, this is the good life right now, the way I'm living now, and I want to help you get there. So like having that community factor is super important. And then you go to the lived experience. So again, back to that idea of saying like, I have a doctorate in this stuff, like I live this life. So a lot of times you can't, sometimes you do, but not always. You don't always find that with clinicians. And then even if they do have the lived experience, again, back to the ethics, a lot of times they're not allowed to share all of those things, right? So with us, our lived experience, that's the key to everything that we do. Like my life right now is an open book. I have shared just about every single thing that I've ever done while I was drinking and doing all my craziness with people. And I do that in the open, with people, in front of crowds, everything. Because like I said, I know that those experiences helped me to become who I am. And I know that by sharing that, it helps people to understand that they're not alone in the struggles that they're going through. Because other people have gone through them as well. And it's not something to be ashamed of. It's something that all of us go through, especially as Native people. None of us are exempt from the issues that we face. Whether we do it directly or we have family members or fellow community members or friends, we're all affected by it. So, having that lived experience is super huge. Have overcome adversity. So again, you have people on that roller coaster ride of recovery, and you have someone that's 5 years in, 6 years in, 7 years in, that's there working, that has been where they've been. They know how to overcome that adversity. So again, going back to that whole idea of being a cheerleader and a confidant and a role model and all those different things, they're able to say, you know what, you can do this because I did it. I know it is possible. So it's not something where people are going out and getting book education, going to school and coming back and saying, well, I'm going to teach this. What recovery coaches are doing are saying, I've been through this. I know what it is and I know how to get out of it. Let's help you do it too, because you can, and that is a whole different thing from someone coming in and say, okay, well, let's hear about your problems and let's hear how you got here and all of that. It's a different thing when you create that lived experience connection with somebody that you've shared those experiences with. It's something super powerful. And then again, going back to culture, able to promote culture. So, having the ability to do cultural events and cultural activities and take people different places, to different cultural events or ceremonies and things like that, to help people to go out and gather medicines and do different things like that. So, really important. Give you guys some examples. So examples of peer support, encouraging individuals to seek service. So I mentioned that before, having the ability you have people that come in and right away they see somebody that they know. And they're like, whoa, what are you doing here? I don't know how many times I've heard that. It's like, I work here. This is what I do now. Like, dang, how long have you been doing this? It's like, oh, I've been sober for this many years. I'm like, for real? And it's like, yeah, that's where I've been, so you're able then to right away, you have that connection. You're able to say, you know what, you can do this too. Let's get you hooked up, and I can guide you through this process. Let's get you going, and eventually people get to know you. They know that you're in that position. You have people just reaching out to you saying, hey, what is it like to be in recovery, or what do I need to do if I wanted to do this? And you're able to kind of recruit people. Sharon Torres, you got a question? Or is that just like a pipe flat? I don't know. Advocate for individuals in need of services and training. So, we talked about that one in the advocacy, and I kind of gave you guys some examples. Able to share life experiences. So, that's probably, like I mentioned, probably the most important thing. There's an art to that, and being really concise in how you do that. But having the ability to, I think, gain that trust within yourself and self honesty and self awareness enough to be able to be comfortable with who you are. Because, like I said, today, like there was a time where I would have been ashamed of a lot of the things that I've done in my life. I've hurt a lot of people. I've hurt myself. I've done a lot of wrong, but like I said, that helped to shape me and mold me into who I am and what I do today. And I realized that those experiences, um, they're invaluable to me. I wouldn't take any of them back. People always ask me that, like, if you go back and change anything, would you? And I always tell them, nope, I wouldn't change a thing. And I've done a lot of bad, but you know what? That all brought me right here to be with you guys today. It's brought me right to where I'm at, and I'm happy today. And being able to share that with people and finding that, that was probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life was to be honest with myself about all of that. That took a couple years to get through that process and to be okay with all of it. But once I did, like I said, now I'm able to just share it openly because I'm comfortable with it. I'm okay with it. I've forgiven myself, for all of the things that I've done. So therefore, I'm able to just openly share it. And when you're able to do that, that's when the magic happens because you have all these other people out there going through the same things or they've done the same things and they're too afraid to speak up about it or they hide it or they lie about it because it is something, they think to be ashamed of. But when you can let people know that, people do make mistakes and you can learn from it and you can grow from it. And, going back to traditional teachings, our path is laid out before us already. So whatever you've gone through, whatever is happening to you, that's exactly what's supposed to happen. And we have to figure out what we're supposed to learn from that. And if we don't, it's just going to keep happening. If you don't learn from your experience, these things are going to keep happening over and over again because you have a purpose on this world, So being able to share that with people, your life experiences, it goes a long way to create connection and just allows people to realize they're not alone. And you'd be surprised how many of our people out there feel like they're alone. Like they're the only ones going through these issues, or they're the only ones that have made these mistakes, or that have, got to this point in their life. When really there's a whole lot of people out there that are either going through the same thing, have been through it, or about to go through it. So if you've found your way through that, and you've gotten to a point where you're comfortable with it, I always encourage people to share that with others. Help them to know they're not alone. Be a part of the solution. Again, we're meeting people, individuals on an equal plane. So at eye level, we're not, above anybody or beneath anybody. We're right there with them, walking side by side to help them get where they want to go. We're helping to remove stigma and labels. I talked a little bit about that before. That is a huge thing, especially within our communities, that we need to start to attack that problem. The judgment and the stigma and the labeling. People can change. People do make mistakes. But a lot of times we're so busy and caught up looking outward and judging people that, we don't realize the impact that has on people. And even people that have decided to change and they're 2, 3, 4, 5 years into recovery and they still have people looking down on them for what they did 5 years ago or 10 years ago. That can be very hurtful to people. And a lot of times that is the catalyst for people to give up. We don't realize that. And a lot of these behaviors, I think, are just, they've been ingrained in us so deeply that I often find that people are not even aware that they're engaging in that, So I think just bringing awareness to it and helping people to realize, like, being judgmental is not healthy, and labeling people stigmatizing people is not healthy, and it's not good for you, and it's definitely not good for them. But the results of that can be devastating for people in recovery. Able to use and incorporate culture in recovery. We talked a lot about that already. Support and culture, promote helping nature. So again, like culturally, our people are helping. We come from a society that's not what we're in right now, where it's individualistic and capitalism and all these things. We came from people that were equal, and we all had roles, and we all helped each other, and nobody ever went without. But we've gotten away with that because we've been kind of thrown into this society that we don't really belong in, and we don't really understand. So it's kind of a process of trying to adapt to that. But we need to get back to this helping nature and peer support. Recovery coaches do that, and we promote that. Promoting traditional families. So a lot of the activities that I mentioned, we're allowed to have people bring their families and bring their kids. It's not exclusive to just one-on-one type of things where, like, you typically think of counseling, where someone comes in, they get their one-on-one counseling session, and they leave. For us, we're always encouraging people to bring their kids in, bring their families in. Promoting traditional gatherings, so able to kind of, like I said, take people out to different places and transport them there and help them to get involved in community activities. Promoting cultural crafts. We did a lot of classes. We do a lot of classes related to cultural crafts. So, moccasin making and dressmaking, ribbon shirt making. Before I left the pre-recovery support program, I was going to teach all of our people how to tan deer hides. So there's still a whole thing of deer hides over there at our building. So I'll probably get back on that now that I've come back to the program. But I've also taught our clients to smoke salmon, and those are things that, again, like a typical clinical staff wouldn't be able to do that, so like you think of your typical counseling center or treatment center, as much as they'd want to do those things, I mentioned there's time constraints and job restraints and things like that. But if you implement peer support, you're able to do a lot of these things, and it brings more people in. It gives them more things to do rather than just come in to seek counseling and do groups. You're actually engaging them in fun, sober activities, promoting cultural diets. So, we built a community garden in the back of the treatment center, and I would go out there every day in the summer, pick vegetables, and come in and cook them for the clients in our kitchen. So we'd sit there and eat healthy foods, and teaching them that, these foods, they impact how we think and how we feel. If we're eating healthy, we're making better decisions, and we feel healthier, and we feel good, and we're happier. So, promoting cultural ceremonies. We oftentimes loaded up our vans and take people to Sundances and things. These are people that normally wouldn't go to those or hadn't been to them before. You'd be surprised how many people in our communities don't take part in our ceremonies. And that went a long way in teaching them some of the ways to where they could go for help. That's the number one place to go if you need help, is our ceremonies. But a lot of people didn't know that, and because they weren't grown up and weren't raised that way, it was hard for them just to on their own say, I'm going to go check it out. So that, again, they need that little push and motivation and that encouragement to do some of these things. We promote language. We invited language and culture program to a lot of our classes. So we would go through our lessons, and then at the end we'd give them time, and they'd talk about the cultural component and give us words that went with some of the things that we talked about. So we'd have a class on behavior and decision making, and at the end they'd talk about behavior and give us words like Izat Duyugli and Zan Duyugli, good and bad behavior. That's in Shoshone from here. But those are things that we learn through that. Promoting of prayer. We always have medicines available in our building for people to come in and use, and we'd take people to gather them too. So we'd take people out to gather cedar every couple months, or go gather our roots and stuff like that. and then teach them how to prepare them so that they could use them, because people didn't have those things in their homes. Those are things that people like, they grew up with those, like myself, just take for granted, that we think everybody knows these things and has access to them, knows how to gather them, but people don't. So, you know, the further we went along, we realized like this is a big part of why people are in addiction and why they can't sustain recovery, because a lot of these cultural components are missing. And because we have this program, we can promote these things and actually go out and do them and show people how to do these things. So, that I think is probably one of the biggest things that I found working with peer recovery support. Peer support during the pandemic. We only have a few minutes, so I can go through this real fast, but we opened up online classes, support meetings, prayer meetings, and then just the flexibility of realizing that because we didn't have all of the ethical constraints, we could call people and text people and check up on them, use Messenger on Facebook to send people messages just to see how they're doing. You know, and that prevented a lot of people during the pandemic from relapsing, because we found ways to connect with people that we weren't using before the pandemic. So also using, you know, virtual platforms to do meetings and things like that. The results, people were more likely to seek service. They were more likely to maintain positive change, more likely to return for services. They increased the trust level. We removed the feelings of being alone, boosted confidence. Culture provides answers to life's challenges, and we cause change at a community level. So again, like getting that community level where we started offering community trainings as well, for recovery and getting people involved in what we're doing on a larger scale. And just, you know, in closing, peer support professionals act as an extension for clinical professionals. So like I said, you know, I have training that would have allowed me to be, you know, a clinical individual, but I chose not to do that. And I found at that exact moment, I found recovery coaching. And I was like, this is what I've been looking for. So a lot of times people ask me, like, you got a master's degree, what are you doing over there? Like working with these alcoholics and addicts doing this stuff. And I'd be like, you don't understand, man. This is, you know, this is where it's at. And it is the extension. So a lot of the ideas that we got during my time there and we're doing now came directly from our clinicians. So I would ask them, like, if you could do anything, what would you do? And they'd say, man, I really wish I could do this. And I'd be like, we can do that. So we started implementing some of the things that they, you know, said they wish they could do if they weren't counselors. So, yeah, that's his presentation there. Like I said, this was, I had to condense this one. This is that one, Megan, I did for that like 3-hour thing. So I shortened it down to 1 hour and tried to squeeze it in there.
I remember when you did this, and it was very long. So you did a good job of squeezing things in. Folks will get to see the rest of this presentation in your PDF that we'll send them. So any questions you guys may have, feel free to email myself or Jason.
Yeah, and here's an example of our recovery gardens I was telling you about. And we took a field that looked like this, the first picture you see. And this is kind of the progression of what we built. And eventually we filled it in. And I used it as a lesson for recovery, because this is what we look like when we first enter into recovery. And as we begin to change things, we start to change and we look better and we feel better. But we have to pull weeds and we have to maintain, and we need nourishment, just like plants do, you know. And eventually you flourish, you know, and this is what the garden looked like at the end. You know, and we took our vegetables to the state fair and got a blue ribbon for our yellow squash. So everyone was pretty proud of that. So, yeah, if you have questions, I got a couple minutes. And I don't mind staying after either if you need me to.
Yeah, if anyone does have questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask Jason.